happening? Whoop. Why is this not? There we go. All right. Sorry about that. Sometimes things take a while to fix, but here we go. All right. Hello, hello. Welcome to the broadcast, Wellbeing Wednesday. And my name is Hadassah Vittar. I am a life coach. I'm a well-being advocate. And tonight I want to talk about ableism and why it is so pernicious. That's a good word, isn't it? Pernicious. Okay. My Twitter setup is not fabulous, but you know what? It's going to have to do because sometimes life is just like that. So I want to talk about ableism because of two books that I have been reading and listening to. One is Being Human by Judy Human of blessed memory, and I realize this is backwards on Twitter and Instagram. My apologies, but hopefully you can see Being Human by Judith Human of blessed memory, and the other one Being Seen by Elsa. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Shimison. Anyway, Being Seen. That is a fabulous book, and well, they're both fabulous. But they really opened my eyes to some of the things. I mean, you've heard me rant about ableism before, but the great thing about these two books, I mean, Judy Human, of course, is the legendary activist, just passed away recently, the legendary activist who brought the Americans with Disabilities Act to the United States. I mean, when she was born, she was disabled with polio at the age of 2, like so many people at that time. She was born in, I think, 1947, something like that. So she was growing up in the early 50s. And at that time, if you were disabled, you were just out of luck. Like she couldn't even go to school because she was in a wheelchair. Nothing was accessible. There were no curb cuts. There were no accessible buses. It's hard to believe for, those of us who have grown up in this time. But the fact remains that she had to really fight for everything. Her mother fought to get her in school. She didn't get to go to school until she was 9. And then she was put in a special education program that barely qualified her to go to university, but obviously she did. And this book, Being Human, is her story, her memoir, and very passionate, very exciting. You really feel like you're there. And so she's the person who led the sit-in in San Francisco at the Human Education, and I forget what it's called, a Health Education and something or other building, federal building in San Francisco. They did a sit-in for 25 days with 150 disabled people, and she was one of the leaders. And then later she was like a deputy secretary of I don't know, something in the U.S. government, and she basically helped bring the Americans with Disabilities Act to life. And of course, it wasn't actually passed, I think, until like 1990s, which is kind of crazy to think about. But anyway, so that's her story. And then I haven't quite finished this one, but I just had to talk about it. So Elsa Shimison was born with congenital rubella syndrome, which is why if you don't have your MMR, for God's sake, go and get it, because basically she got it, as she put it, a bunch of Wall Street jerks decided not to get it, and then they went to a gay bar and infected her dad, who died, infected her mom with rubella, and then her dad got HIV. It was like a rough time. But anyway, so she was born partially blind, partially deaf, and grew up obviously to be a very determined person who has written She's won Hugo Awards. She's a science fiction and fantasy writer, so obviously she writes very, very well. And this book is basically about what it's like to be a disabled person, specifically in the U.S. because that's where she lives. But I don't think things are much better in Canada. Um, just as an example, people have such a stereotypical ideas of disabled people. Um, I was talking with someone about this book that, I said, this, she's a deaf-blind woman and she writes books. And the person said, so does she dictate them? No, she can write, but she can read, she can write. It's difficult. She needs, she wears hearing aids, she has really thick glasses. She's not completely blind, she's not completely deaf. But that's what people immediately jump to. And just generally, disabled people are not treated as really whole, complete human beings in our society. And in this book in particular, she really talks about what she calls medical capitalism, which is particularly an issue in the US, but it's becoming more of an issue in Canada too, because we have some governments that are provincial governments in particular that are trying really hard to privatize our health system. So this is not something that we should be complacent about. I mean, you see what's happening to the NHS in the UK, that the Tory government is trying to destroy it. So those of us who live in places that have socialized medicine should not take it for granted because it can be taken away. And certainly in the United States, it's just shocking. I mean, my second child was born with a medical issue that ended up with the baby being in the an ICU for a month, and having a bunch of surgeries and so on. Everything's fine now, thank God. But the thing is that all that cost us was parking at the hospital. That was our entire bill for the whole thing, was parking at the hospital for that time. I was in the hospital for 5 days. The baby was in the hospital for nearly a month, and it cost us the cost of my husband's parking. So that is something that should not be taken for granted and definitely deserves to be fought for. So if you are in Canada and you are um, concerned about these things, we need to take action and make sure that our health system isn't destroyed and privatized like so many of these Tory governments are trying to do. But anyway, back to medical capitalism. Basically, the idea that a disabled body is a problem to be solved rather than a patient or a person to be treated with respect. And basically, the idea that some people, you see it now with long COVID. I don't wish long COVID on anybody, obviously, but there are some people for whom this is the end of my life. I should just kill myself because this life isn't worth living. And this woman is here to tell the world that every life, every disabled body is a life worth living. Okay, every person has value. Like the whole concept of eugenics is, I mean, it was started in the US, and not surprisingly, you want to talk about capitalism and its concern for human dignity. But so the whole idea of not treating disabled people like complete human beings. Like she talks about how people told her she would never find love, she would never get married, and she would never have children. She had a miscarriage, and her doctor offered to sterilize her. So, she wouldn't have to worry about getting pregnant again because obviously someone who's disabled doesn't want to have, how could a blind, deaf person have children? I mean, it all comes down to support and to not being ableist. That's what part of the incredible work that Judy Heumann did was in forcing lawmakers and institutions to understand that it is the right of a disabled person to be part of society. It's not charity. It's not, oh, well, if it's not too much trouble, we'll include you. No, every human being has the right to have a life that is worthy and that is dignified. Bring it back. Vigor and dignity. Regardless of how much vigor a person has on a certain day, they deserve to be supported, to be able to have their best life, however that looks. And that's the other thing. Another thing that Elsa talks about is, the pressure to try and hide her disabilities, to try and pretend that she was just like everybody else, when she is actually a very special and unique person, as indeed we all are. But there's a lot of pressure to conform. And actually, I was talking with someone the other day, an American, who was talking, we were talking about masks. And she said, well, I was wearing a mask, but kind of the last week or so, I've stopped wearing them because I was kind of the only one. It's really important for people to stop and think about what they're doing. And like, I didn't say to her, you're in middle school, because that would have been really rude. But the fact remains that people need to think about the reasons that they do things. And social pressure, I know, can be really, really hard. And ableism, like I said, is really pernicious. And that comes back here again because a main reason to be wearing masks these days, I mean, I don't want to catch COVID. Nobody wants to catch COVID. COVID sucks. But the thing is that there are people for whom it is more than just unpleasant, more than just, oh, it sucks. For some people, it can be a death sentence. And immunocompromised and disabled people absolutely deserve to live a really good life. And it is really important that as a community of care, as a group of people who live together, work together, care about each other, that we do everything that we can to make good lives for everyone who is part of our community. And that's something that I think certainly in late capitalist societies is kind of falling by the wayside, or has fallen by the wayside, because if a person's value is only measured in how much money can be made off them, if a person can't produce, if a person can't be, a cog in the machine, then they're not of interest and they're not considered worthy. I mean, when you look at how the Nazis began their project, they started with disabled people. They started with disabled children, and then they moved to disabled adults. And that was the first step. And we're seeing it now because eugenics is alive and well. And whether it's disabled people, whether it's trans people, whether it's anyone who requires any sort of support and health care that is not exactly the same as every cis white hetero person, then there's a lot of places in our Western society, in our capitalist society, where they are not considered worthy of receiving that support and that care. And that is eugenics. That is deciding that one kind of person is worth more than another. I mean, Elsa talks about how in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was this discussion about rationing ventilators, and that disability might be one of the considerations in deciding who would get one. So it's just shocking. And I understand that if you physically don't have enough ventilators, then there have to be terrible choices made. I mean, Sophie's Choice is a book to this day. I could not bring myself to read it, but I have some idea of what it's about. I tried to read it. I just couldn't. But I just want to come back to talking about how even people of goodwill, even people who mean well, people who love others, it's like, it's kind of like racism. Ableism is just as bad because, unless you're really, really working on yourself, unless you're watching everything you say and everything you do, when we are raised in this bath, in this atmosphere of eugenics and of ableism and of the assumption that some lives are just worth more than others, then it's very, very hard to break out of it. And that's why I think that it's so important that these two books are available, especially this one, but I mean this one too. This one, Being Human, that just it just blew me away. But I was listening to this one on as an audiobook. If you follow me on social media, then you know that audiobooks are my thing. But if I like the audiobook, I will then get, the physical book so that I can read it as well, because all the different things. But like this one had me, crying and laughing and all the things. And it's so important. And it's a message that I think is just not out there enough. So that's what I wanted to talk with you about tonight. And if you have thoughts on this, if you're on live, thanks for joining live. If you're on watching the replay, thanks for watching the replay. I would love to see some comments, some thoughts on this. Next week is Passover, and the following week is also Passover. So I'm going to miss the next 2 Wednesdays. So I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to try and do this on a different evening or just skip the 2 weeks. I might do that. And in that case, calendar. In that case, I would be back on the 19th. So on tonight, and then the 5th and the 12th. I won't be on, and then I'll be back on the 19th. So I would love to know what you think of this. I would love to see your comments. If you have any stories you want to share with me about how ableism has affected your life, because trust me, it affects all of us. And if you're young and strong and healthy and you think that ableism doesn't affect you, it affects your friends, it affects your family, it affects your grandparents, who maybe can't go somewhere because it's not accessible, or maybe they can't go somewhere because they're immunocompromised and people will not mask. I mean, there's lots of possibilities for for ableism and eugenics and to affect people's lives. So I would love to know what you think of this, and so drop me a message, send me an email, check out my link tree wherever you're seeing this. I have lots of different. This is going to lots of different places. I've got whatchamacallit, Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And in all of those places, there's a link to my link tree where you can send me a message. You can check out some of my links and see what I'm doing there. And I would love to hear from you anytime. You can text me. There's a number that you can text me at. You can send me a Facebook message. You can send me an email. You can do all sorts of things. So I would love to hear from you, especially on this topic, but also on others. And so, as I said, I will not be on for the next 2 Wednesdays because of Passover. So if you celebrate Passover, I will wish you a Chag Sameach. If you celebrate Easter, I'll wish you a happy Easter. If you are currently in Ramadan, I will wish you a Ramadan Mubarak. And we should all have peace and health and love. And that is my wish for all of us. And I'll see you again in 3 weeks. Bye.